The Art Center inspires creativity and contributes to
community well-being
through equitable access to
and engagement with visual arts.
We collaborate to offer exhibitions,
learning opportunities, artist development,
and cultural events centered on
art, artists, and art enthusiasts in the greater Corvallis area.
Welcome to TAC Makes, a podcast. I'm Jenny Castle, the curator at the Art Center in Corvallis, Oregon. Today I'm joined by two artists, Robin Kerr and Coco Ma. Robin is originally from New Zealand and now lives in Portland, Oregon. She utilizes acrylic paint, textile collage, and wax, pencil, and pastel in her work. Coco is a New York-based Chinese artist who primarily works in mixed media installations, sculpture, and sculptural painting. The two are merging their talents in a main gallery exhibition entitled Playdemonium, on view at the Art Center through August 24th. Welcome, Robin and Coco. Thank you for joining me today. Robin, let's start with you. Will you share a little bit about your background and how those lived experiences have shaped your current artistic practice?
Yeah, sure. I have always loved doing artwork ever since I was very small. Funnily enough, when I was finishing high school, I was advised that I should definitely go into the creative space as a professional line because that's where all my passion was shown and there's a little bit of talent there. And of course, inevitably, I did absolutely not that. I went into science. So my background is biochemistry and most of my professional career has been in healthcare of one sort of or another. However, on the side, I've done sort of professional illustration for books along the way. But it wasn't until just around 2 years ago that I finally decided that I really wanted to move into doing art full time. So I feel like a newbie at this, emerging artist, whatever that term is. But I'm doing it full time, which is brilliant. I'm really, really lucky. I've got a little studio in the back of the house where we live. Chickens oversee what's going on in the backyard. Yeah, my work is abstract, kind of, sort of. I call it kind of abstracted. So I know one of the things that we might talk about a bit more later on is I'm really interested in how you make something that is more about a feeling or an experience rather than a reflection of what people are looking at. However, a lot of people find that really challenging. They want to see something that they recognize. So my sort of approach to this idea of something being abstracted is my spin on what you can see. I seldom attempt to create something that looks that is a scene or is supposed to look like something, sort of creates itself, but there'll be recognizable elements in it. So that's sort of a rough explanation of how I approach my work. Definitely it's influenced by just everything around us in Oregon, definitely by everything that was around me in New Zealand. A lot of outdoor stuff, textiles, pottery, colors, all of those are sort of influenced by what I grew up with and also what I experienced here in Oregon, which are actually, there's a lot of overlap in the geography of this area. So they tend to sort of augment each other in that.
Coco, what about you? Can you share with the listeners some of the things that shape your artistic practice?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Beijing, China, and I came to the US for undergrad until when I was 19. And most of my experience back at home, that's where lots of information and inspiration in my art comes from. After I came to the US, there's lots of materials that I started rethinking about. I've been using lots of fun and collected materials in my sculpture and also sculptural painting works. I like thinking of elements to their like foundational aspects, for example, colors, which carry lots of cultural references for me. I'm interested in human body parts, especially female body, my own body. I used to think of my body in a more general and ambiguous way, but since this year when I started really focusing on sculptural paintings, that's where the body kind of quality emerged more in my work right now. And lots of my work is about this kind of cultural gap that I experienced between my life back home and here in the US, and also the feminism aspect of lots of idea, the kind of struggle, both emotionally and culturally, that I experienced, and just kind of, surrounding my life, because I think through art, that's where I get the chance to digest lots of experiences that doesn't really get analyzed in my daily work.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because I think the more I contemplate what I'm doing with my artwork, it's not conscious, but afterwards I realize a lot of what I'm doing is processing that rather peculiar feeling of not being of one place or of another. As soon as you leave your own country and move to another country, you're automatically an outsider in both places. And most of us have that feeling of being a bit of an outsider, I think, but it's just sort of exaggerated because you don't even have that anchor of your hometown or your home world, your home country. And so I think my artwork, and I think Coco is sort of expressing this too, my artwork is a lot subconsciously about bridging that funny feeling of I'm never absolutely positive about what's going on, ever. And that's after we've been here 30 plus years. So, it's not like I'm a new immigrant. Coco's much, much newer to the United States than I am, but I've sort of resolved myself to never losing that feeling. Thank goodness I've got the artwork that can help process that. Like, have I got it right? Am I seeing this from the right angle? Am I understanding what's going on? Do I really... And if I'm anxious, is this a way to sort of process that as well? So I think, every now and then there's a little bit of panic, and the artwork process definitely helps with that.
No, it's really interesting to think about a sense of discomfort, like being intrinsic to your identity and like wanting to hold on to that, and then trying to find ways to express it so you can keep a relationship with it. That's like really interesting. And I can relate to it in a lot of different ways. Before we dive too deeply into the conceptual ideas behind your works, I think those are very interesting. You both have mentioned using specific materials and how color is very important in your work. People will potentially be listening to this in the gallery or listening to it maybe before or after they visit. Specifically with the work we're showing in Playdemonium, can you speak a little bit to color choice and material choice and how that's important, how that might be important to the viewer as they experience your work?
Yeah, so for the works that will be included in the exhibition, they were created this year, so fresh works, and lots of them, they have a back and a front. So even though I'm still working with the really traditional wooden frame kind of painting structure, I used a structure like the handle that I attached to the top of lots of paintings to turn the wooden frame into more of a infrastructure that has both a back and a front. And the back is more like the interior kind of personal cave that you can gradually discover as you move around the work. So I often kind of think about, because I work both in 3D and 2D works right now, so I often think about what a flat surface means to me and the viewer, because it could be understood as, like a window or a world that you look into versus like the sculptural work that you feel more like coexisting with the reality, the setting that you see it at. I also thought about whether there's kind of some special quality of this flattened surface that can be used to express something that's different than being structural and sculptural. So that's one of like a major question I'm kind of thinking regarding my practice right now. And for the colors, there's a series of works that I call hair that will be included in the exhibition. And for those works, the front is pretty much entirely black. I've been thinking of black on black, this kind of color that only shows the shape and what is depicted through a really subtle kind of color change. And I wonder what that kind of viewing experience could evoke in the viewer versus something that, you can just clearly see the image several steps away from the work. But this kind of black on black structure requires you to really scrutinize and place yourself close to the surface. I'm interested in the kind of play that allows the viewers to navigate toward the work in different kind of ways.
Robin, what about you? I mean, color, your work is very colorful, and yet there's, I think, several pieces that we'll be exhibiting that have some of the subtleness that Coco is talking about. How do you approach layering and color choice in your work?
It's very random. It definitely is sort of dependent on the day, and I literally approach a piece. I work at the moment pretty consistently on wood panel, and I'll just put some kind of layer underneath. Sometimes I'll just cover it with acrylic paint, whatever paint, just to do a base, usually with a rag or something. And then I've got a big tray of wax pastels. And depending on the day, I'll grab a color that appeals and I'll put it down and I'll make some sort of object, and then that drives the rest of the piece. I do like strong, bold colors, but it shifts and moves. It depends on the season. It depends on my kind of mood. Just maybe I've seen some other piece of artwork that really appeals, and so I'll play around with those sort of colors. But similarly to what Coco was talking about, some of the most challenging and interesting are when you do have, say, exactly like Coco's talking about black. One of my favorite things to do is do a whole red piece, but the whole red piece will have maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different reds on there. And if you're far back, it would just look like one big piece of red. But as you get closer, you realize that they're just subtly different. Blues are really good for that. Black is amazing. And what I found so interesting about that is how black stops being black sometimes, depending on what angle you're looking at. It's one of the reasons I love working with the wax pastel so much, because it's a lot of people will be familiar with oil pastels, but it's harder. It's a little bit tougher, but you can still do all the same things. I'll literally use a hairdryer sometimes to melt it and melt different colors together and get textures, and that subtle shift, the one great big blob of red pastel and then a tiny, tiny bit of yellow in there, you can completely change what you're seeing with your shapes. Doesn't sound very organized, and that's probably because it's not very organized. It's very instinctual. It's very just of the moment, but it ends up allowing that picture, that sort of randomness, the feeling to come through in color and texture together. So
yeah, I really agree with what you said, Robin, especially on the spontaneousness, that how you use the color. Because for me, color has lots of association with personal feelings and emotions, the kind of quality you need to be spontaneous about, unless you fits into a kind of stereotype, which is not something I'm interested in my work. Talking about red, I actually like to use red a lot too. For example, for the installation that I'm working on for the show, lots of fingers that I'm casting appear in various different kind of subtle redness. And I just feel like, red, especially for women, it has lots of association with my life and also my emotional depth. It's a color that's so expressive. It can go toward more cooler kind of quality, toward the warmer side, and just basing on the different kind of drops of other color you add to red, it can turn into so many different emotions and, feelings that you share with the viewer. Yeah, so I'm actually really interested in the red color that you talked about in your work, because I know that you use lots kind of different red, and I'm wondering how do you think about that?
It just has always grabbed my eye artistically too. Like when I first started looking at paintings, if something had red in it, I would just swivel to it. So it was definitely, there's something about red that I find incredibly attractive. My perverse side is interested in the fact that a lot of people don't like red. They feel it's too in your face, it's too aggressive, it's too alarming. To me, it's just a bold, strong color. So even if I'm doing something that's a little bit more neutral, just about every single one of my pieces has a tiny bit of red in it somewhere. Sometimes it's like a secret, it's like, look out for the little piece of red. And the thing that I found interesting as I've got a bit older is I've understood that red actually has really important meaning, or it's featured in all sorts of different cultures, but in really different ways. Like I've always known that in a lot of the Asian countries, red is very, very special in a lot of ways. But what I didn't realize is one of the ladies I follow on Instagram uses red a lot, and she's from Ireland. And years and years and years ago, red was a very common color for clothes for women, just in the day-to-day life, was a deep, deep, beautiful red. I'm like, that is crazy. I had no idea. It's just, there's something very special about it. There's some magic behind it that I don't understand. How you can sort of play around with it. What draws you in? I don't know. I don't understand it. I don't think I'll ever understand it, but it's just endlessly fascinating to me.
I love Coco already used this word, but Robin, like, you have this spontaneous nature that is so youthful and without inhibition. And even in the way you talk about your relationship with color and process, it's just beautiful. Because I get in my own way all the time when I'm making art, and it just seems like you found a portal like straight into it. It's lovely. It's so great. What I find really interesting about bringing the two of you together in a show is that although you have really different aesthetic styles, like, I think it'll be very clear to the viewer whose work is whose, but I think you're using experimentation and abstraction in similar ways. And I think that even in the way you're talking about your work right now, it's, I think, to discover a sense of honesty about self and about your place in the world. And it allows, the abstract work allows for contradictions and paradoxes within that honest place, right? So can you, Robin, we can start with you. Do you have, is any of that resonating with you? And do you find, you've already described it. You've already described your sense of wonder and spontaneity, and which is basically experimentation, is an important part of your process. But is there anything that you want to relate to the viewer that's really important for them to understand that will help them enter your work with more clarity?
Yeah, again, I'm never sure how much of this is conscious and how much is unconscious. So after the fact, I'll look at something and something will become evident. It's like, oh, of course, that's a reflection of da-da-da. So one of the things that definitely seems to repeat itself is that contradiction that you're talking about. I'll have big blocks of completely flat color on purpose that's been restricted. So I'll use, the good old blue painting tape to make a very clean shape. And then somewhere else in the same piece, there'll be something that's completely smudged or melted or sort of fuzzy around the edges, or I'll have tiny, tiny, tiny little lines, as skinny as possible that you barely can make out, while you've got another, as I say, sort of very bold, say, carpet type of element. I think that goes back to that feeling of, I'm never quite sure what's going on. I've got to watch, I've got to observe, I've got to think about what I'm seeing, because what you see on the surface and what you see up front is not necessarily the whole picture. Haha. I think on purpose, subconsciously, on purpose, I'm always trying to push that idea of there's something else to see here. There's another level. There's another meaning. Don't make assumptions. Create your own story about what you're seeing. So I'm creating my story, particularly through the abstraction and through these sometimes conflicting elements. You can create your story, which is as legitimate as mine. So that's sort of that portal. That's like, I'm not showing you something that you have to understand because it's this way. I'm showing you something that you can put your own understanding on. And I think that's partly why I like abstraction so much. I think that becomes more possible when you're already throwing like these little bits in and somebody goes, well, why did you do that? Or how come it's that way? Like, am I looking at this from above or am I looking at it from the side? And I can say, yep, all of that's true. That is up to you. If you want to be above it, then it's a bird's eye view, cool. If you want to be underneath it, that's good too. Yeah, I think it keeps coming back to that idea of I've taken myself out of somewhere familiar. I've put myself in somewhere that I'm getting more familiar with. But there'll always be that element of I'm not quite fitting in there. So how can I help other people sort of feel that a little bit?
Yeah, I love the idea that the like analyzing the reasons is far less important than like experiencing the emotion you feel looking at it and it, like doing a self-exploration there, which is yeah. Coco, what about you? I mean, like I said, your work, I think it will be perceived very different than Robin's, but I think a lot of these conceptual ideas are rooted deeply in your work. Do you have anything you want to share with the gallery visitors?
For me, I always perceive my work as a mediation between the creator and the viewer. It's a way to start the conversation without both parties being present in person. It's a way to kind of express myself, but also understand how other people can express themselves through my work. I don't think the work is just one direction. I think it's a mutual communication, somehow magically, even though, we're not like talking in person. Also work a lot with abstraction. I mean, personally, I don't see abstraction and reality as two terms that conflict with each other. Standing at a hybrid zone between these two, and abstraction is just a way allow me to move freely through most of the things around me. I want to share one of the material that I used a lot in the body of work that's shown in the exhibition, which is toilet paper. People see the hair series at the back. The inner cave part is made entirely using toilet paper and then burned to create a really shallow depth and a harsh dark shape. I use toilet paper mostly because it's a thing that's so abundant in the US. It's just everywhere. When you go somewhere, you don't even think about it. It's kind of different from where I grew up. Even though Beijing is like the capital city of China, still, when you go to a public restroom, usually there wouldn't be any toilet paper. You need to bring it with you no matter where you go. Napkin or toilet paper, just bring it with you. And even if you go to, the shopping mall, there would have the toilet paper stool that only allows you to tier one block of toilet paper every time. So that's how you save using it. So when I first came to the US and realized actually you don't need to bring it with you at all, no matter where you go, I was kind of shocked. Yeah, I feel for me that's a symbol that speaks about how the infrastructure works around people, especially for women, because we have menstruation. And, that's something that's like a lifesaver when you don't have a pad or a tampon with you. And it's so necessary in my daily life, but still, it's like a part of human infrastructure. It's not like air and water, but it's just so abundant in the US. So I'm like always thinking about what that kind of material could mean to me. This kind of really trivial, but also major experience in my life because of where I am and whether it has lots of, extended meanings that kind of talks about these two different cultural backgrounds. Yeah, that's a thing I'm thinking of.
First of all, I didn't know that was a cultural difference. So that was really fascinating to hear about. And I love that you're bringing that material into your work to kind of explore that realization. That's amazing. Robin, do you have any thoughts?
It's so funny, actually. Not culturally, but, well, maybe it's cultural. I mean, when we were kids, it was a big deal whether you had toilet paper available or not too. It was one of those things where it was still sort of a little bit post-World War II-ish as far as publicly available disposable things. And yeah, school was always tricky because they had that slightly, they had squares of paper and it was slightly waxed even. So it was dreadful. You know, that kind of was a big deal, especially when you're a little kid and learning to go to the bathroom all by yourself before that was all happening at home. So I hadn't really thought about that in context of New Zealand versus the United States, because certainly you can always get toilet tissue absolutely everywhere whenever you want. So the Costco, the world of the Costco sort of thing.
So, Coco, can you speak a little bit more about that piece in particular? I mean, because you found this very abundant material in the US, and then you decide to burn it away in this piece. Like, can you speak a little bit about that decision? And like, is it more of a spontaneous experimentation, kind of like Robin's talking about, or like, do you feel like the act is significant? Is there like an act of destruction that's very intentional with that piece?
Yeah, I guess what I'm interested in that burning action is that when I burn the toilet paper, the smell is not different from, burning a piece of normal paper or wood, because pretty much they're the same thing originally. How I created that series is that I layered many layers of toilet paper first, and after they get dried, I burned them through until I reached the wood panel on the back. In that way, I create a really shallow depth that's also really dark. And for me, it's a way of thinking about scar, wound, and what those kind of burnt mark really means. For some of the works I stitched, I used thread to do a structure that's like stitching the wound together. It's a way of creating image on top of this kind of infrastructural shape, but also trying to think about the burning action, the persisting smell that's still lingering, even though the action has been done a couple months ago. I just feel like the darkness that I get from burning, the really dark brown kind of color is not anything near how we can paint through pigments. It's kind of natural. It's very rich. And yeah, I'm interested in that kind of action.
Popped in my head, and I think it's significant since you're spending time in Oregon for the first time, right? This is your first time here. I mean, the wildfires that come through this part of the region and the burn zones that are left behind, it might be really interesting for you to go explore some of those areas and like have that experience in the natural world. It might affect how you're viewing this approach in some ways. So
there are we do a lot of hiking, and we hardly ever go anywhere anymore without going through some kind of burn zone. But what's really interesting about it is how scary, ugly it can be, but also amazingly gorgeous. Like there was one area on the other side of Mount Hood that we went up, and whatever the wood was, it burnt into this just gorgeous sort of mahogany, shiny. There must have been oil in the wood as well. It was the most... And so all the different patterns in the wood came through from the burning. It was just stunningly gorgeous, but it was, a devastating burn area with all this beauty. The burn areas regenerate, and that's gorgeous in itself when you can see a lot of the undergrowth coming through. But even the burnt wood itself, or the black against, like if it's a snowy hike and you've got the deep, deep black of the trees against the white of the snow, it's just mind-blowing.
This interview has gone on for a while. So maybe it's time to wrap it up. But I mean, there's a lot of other questions I have. Like you both have repetitions of pattern and symbols in your work. And I think there's like a whole breadth of conversation there as well. So I guess I'll close by saying that we will be holding a reception for Playdemonium on July 12th, starting at 5:30 p.m. And both Coco and Robin are going to be there in the gallery doing an artist talk and a Q&A. So I hope that if you're listening to this before July 12th, that you join us for that artist panel and discussion. Is there anything either of you would like to add before we sign off?
I think both of us are going to have family members present at that opening as well. So it'll be interesting to get their response to the show, given that they're the ones that stayed at home but are visiting. So that I think that's going to be a really interesting aspect to this exhibit as well.
Yeah, we didn't even dive into the idea of we were talking about ideas of relationship with self, but not necessarily with others in our family and our friends, things like that. That's a whole. We'll dive into it on the 12th, everybody. It's there. Coco, what about you? Anything you want to add?
I'm just really excited to have this show with Robin. And I want to say thank you, Jenny, for being our really amazing curator. Yeah, and I look forward to meeting everyone during our opening.
Great. So we'll sign off now. And I will say Playdemonium with Robin Kerr and Coco Ma will be on view at the main gallery at the Art Center in Corvallis, Oregon from July 12th to August 24th. And as I said before, there will be an opening reception on July 12th starting at 5:30. So please join us. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to TAC Makes. This is a new creative project at the Art Center, and I hope you enjoy our learning curve as much as we do. You can find more episodes on YouTube and Spotify and on our website, theartscenter.net. That's arts with an S.